All right, awesome. And that's going to be, I believe, edited into a big video with all the other stages that are going on in all the different cities. I had slides at one point. I'm not sure they're up anymore, but yeah, I mean, given in the interest of time, I'm not going to take too long here. I mean, roughly, what I'm trying to get across is, where's our focus on building a developer ecosystem, and what kind of things do we have to think about when we're doing this, right? We have times in the project where we're focused on, building out the technology, or building out libraries, or trying to get new teams building in the ecosystem. This has been a pretty big last 6 months, 12 months for us, right? Like, Parachains have gone live, XCM has gone live. We're starting to focus more into those community side of things now, again, right? Like, now that this technology is live, how do we create the best experience for people who are going to come into the ecosystem? And, in a sense, that's also what Governance V2 is about, right? The existing models of the council and referendums weren't really suitable for mass adoption, right? So that's maybe targeted towards a very broad audience. I'm thinking a bit more about, well, what about the developer audience? And the reason I call it the Parachain Playground is sort of this feeling that I had at early blockchain hackathons. Like, I don't know if any of you went to those really early ETH Global events, back in 2016. It was really fun because of the test networks. It was fun because there was kind of a shared place where you could just run around the room with all of the different people who are working on projects and, talk to somebody who's building like one thing on one smart contract, and you're building another thing on another smart contract, and you decide, hey, let's join forces or do a little experiment here. And that's the playground, right? Like, how do you create this simulation? First, I'm going to take a little bit of a detour. For those of you who aren't familiar with me, I'm one of my roles is the leading the Parachain's core development team. So I think many of you might be expecting a little bit of an update on the Parachain's core technology. So I'll go into that first. What is our focus in the near term and midterm, right? The big one that's coming up is asynchronous backing. I'd say broadly we're focused on functionality and optimization, right? Making Parachains as a product into a better product, and making Parachains as a product faster, right? More transactions per second, more chains, more validators, all of that. But the big thing coming up, which is a large optimization, is asynchronous backing, right? One of the earlier talks mentioned, well, there's only half a second for authoring Parachain blocks. This changes that. It gives a lot more time for collators to author Parachain blocks and to validate them, which means a lot more execution is going to be happening. I'm going to write a big blog post about asynchronous backing. I'm not going to go into it now. But yeah, keep an eye out for that. We're scaling the team, right? We're right now around 6 or 7 people actually focused on Parachain's core tech. We're looking to hire quite a few more to do that. We're looking at implementing parathreads. For those of you who aren't familiar, these are pay-as-you-go parachains. Essentially, you don't have to win an entire slot that lasts for 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, or 2 years. You can just sort of pay as you go, right? And this really lowers the barrier to entry to the ecosystem for anybody who's looking to write a parachain. Another thing is peer-to-peer XCMP, right? This is a massive optimization that's going to increase the amount of messages that parachains can send to each other. Now that XCM is live, I expect that bandwidth is going to become one of the bottlenecks that parachains are pushing on. So further optimizations on peer-to-peer XCMP is very much needed. And sort of general performance engineering stuff. We have a bunch of skill specializations. I might as well mention we are hiring, right? So if you find yourself to be a protocol developer, or Rust developer, who's interested in these types of things, if you'd like to work on peer-to-peer networking or blockchain protocol stuff, robust economic incentives, monitoring, security, or just general node implementation, those are things we're looking for. So Think about it. But yeah, let's come back to the Parachain's Playground. So, like, what do I mean by this, right? It's sort of creating that space where teams, like, both new and old, can come and experiment. At the moment, we have one of the largest developer communities in the blockchain space and one of the largest growing as well, right? Test networks are that space where they can come together. And our approach to this is to identify the ways that we think Polkadot itself is going to be used and ensure that the playground services those needs, right? You can go very fine-grained on this. You can also go very large-grained. So, we're thinking about, well, what are the kind of categories of network participants that we're going to have? And can break it down roughly like this. And I think that this actually fundamentally represents a shift in terms of how we communicate to the developer ecosystem. I think that a lot of our communication so far has been in the sense of, hey, come build a parachain with Substrate and deploy it on Polkadot, right? And that is one way to get involved in the Polkadot ecosystem. It's certainly not the only way. I mean, in fact, parachains themselves are going to be products, right? You're going to have the parachain developer teams, but you're also going to have, say, smart contract developers who are building smart contracts on top of those. You're going to have UI developers. You're going to have end users or people who are being trained in how to use the blockchain. You're going to have front-end developers. And I think one particular case that I really like to focus on is what I call off-chain agents, right? These are basically bots that are participating in the network, right? We're building economic games, and you need some players. So I'll focus on a few of the key categories that we're still, quite clear are going to represent a large proportion of the amount of people who are working on Polkadot. Parachain developers are, this is a very deep tech thing, right? If you're building a parachain, that's certainly a large commitment. You're building a service or a market that's going to serve the entire network, right? This is a core foundational component. It's a large commitment. It's a lot of innovation. These are typically not like one or two people tinkering in a basement, right? I'm not sure how many people actually tinker on code in basements, but probably you're going to have to hire people and get out of the basement to write a parachain. Smart contracts are going to act as smaller protocols, right? They could be stuff that like AMMs. It could be borrow and lending platforms, as we've seen in other places. It could be other stuff we haven't thought of yet. These are going to be smaller protocols, right? Because they're just going to represent sort of a timeshare within a particular smart contract platform. But they'll also act as glue code between protocols, right? So you might have a couple parachains deployed, and some smart contract somewhere is going to glue those things together and create a new type of view or interaction on the market. So we have to service those types of developers as well. And agents, right? I think this is really crucial. This is if you decide to go and build an MEV arbitrage bot, right? That is crucial to the network. That reflexively creates liquidity, or it could be somebody who's writing a bot to focus on liquidating over or under collateralized positions, right? Any type of bot, as well as, for example, in the governance v2 situation, where you're going to need bots that are submitting transactions, right, on behalf of, say, delegates to accept delegations that they've received, things like this. These types of agents are very important to write and create a healthy network. I have a couple of ideas here for, say, XCM-flavored agents, right? I think cross-chain MEV is going to be quite interesting. You're going to be able to see messages come in from other chains. You're going to be able to see those sort of float through the network before they're confirmed and front-run those and inspect them on the outgoing side. You can have cross-chain market mechanisms. You could have automated participants that are interacting with a bunch of different chains, right? They're going to be rebalancing and trading and doing all of that stuff. You could have agents acting as ambassadors of a home chain on another chain, right? Ensuring that, let's say that there's a step of a product workflow that's actually happening on some chain that's not necessarily the home chain, making sure that that actually gets processed, right? Submitting another transaction if necessary, or just keeping the ball rolling so the end user has a good experience. But I think one of the key takeaways for developing in this new ecosystem is that there's no atomicity, right? Like, this is sort of a new frontier of the types of agents that you would end up writing, because you can't ensure that, like, either my transaction goes through or it doesn't, and it only goes through if I make money, for instance, right? Like in the XCM world, you have to coordinate activities that are going to be confirmed at different times and in different orders, potentially. And that's a very major shift. But it's quite exciting, because I think that it's this new perspective means that products are going to be built in the liminal spaces between chains. And this is kind of what I'm trying to get to with the Rococo network, right? This is the network that's already live for testing parachains. But it's more than just for testing parachains, right? Like, let's say we had a version of every single major parachain deployed on there, right, with channels set up between them. This is a place where people can actually experiment with something that would behave very much like it would on the main Polkadot or Kusama networks, right? You can take this to a group of developers and say, like, hey, see what kind of code you can figure out, and they can do it, for free, right? They don't have to worry about deploying it to the mainnet, or if this is a place they can experiment. Rococo has a bunch of weaknesses right now, and those are things that we're working on addressing. So, the deployment process requires some manual intervention. There's a limited number of validators, and these are all operated by Parity Technologies. So there's no there are some limits to the amount of parachains that can be supported on Rococo right now, but it's still more than enough to keep pace with the main networks right now. And there's some lack of tooling, like just broad developer tooling of, well, if we're looking for people to experiment with deploying applications between blockchains, then you need some kind of deployment tooling and things for that. But roughly, you have kind of three prongs to this strategy, right? You have the live test network, where you have everything deployed on there, all the parachains, smart contracts, channels between them. You have encouraged long-form experimentation. So this can take the form of things like bounties or grants from the Web3 Foundation or from the Treasury. It's like, hey, Treasury thinks this is a possible use case. Like, okay, prove that you can do this on Rococo. Or there's the Substrate Builders program from Parity, which can say, like, help teams connect with each other and do experiments on Rococo. I mean, I think what we've seen of parachain teams is if two parachain teams just want to test like a cross-chain use case with each other, they'll just open up their own little relay chain and test out whether that works. But the explosive combinations come when you have three or more, right? Then you just need APIs, you need standards and interfaces that they can communicate with each other through. And that's going to live on Rococo. And we need encouraged short-form experimentation. So these will be things like hackathons or challenges and games, right? Like the Hacker House we've just had in New York, or a bunch of, we're adding a bunch of people to focus on improving sort of the amount and depth of the hackathons that we're going to be launching. And you can get a bunch of relatively new developers in a room and just say, hey, all of this stuff exists on Rococo. Yeah, so to dig into that a bit more, you have hackathons, hacker houses. There'll be training via the academy, right? I'm not sure how many of you are aware, but we'll be doing a sort of training program that is going to be ongoing, and there'll be multiple cohorts. But if you're going into a classroom setting, you can just get trained on, like, well, let's try it out on Rococo. You can actually create something like a little parathread, or create a smart contract, or create an agent that interfaces with real code that's the exact same code that's deployed on the mainnet. And I think community-hosted challenges in games, I think about, for example, some of the challenges that ZK Validator has hosted, right, with solving zero-knowledge puzzles, right? You could have similar types of puzzles and things like that designed to get people who want to compete and who are curious into the developer ecosystem. So I'll leave you with a few key thoughts, right? As Polkadot advances into a multi-chain future, our developer ecosystem should evolve accordingly. We need to change our strategies to match the new types of things that people can build in this ecosystem. I mean, build a parachain with Substrate is great, and I think a lot of people should be doing that. But that's a huge level of commitment. I think there's many people who are going to look to get in other ways, and we need to accommodate that. So to that end, we'd make sure that there are as many entry points into the ecosystem as possible. And in the multi-chain world, opportunities are going to exist between parachains. And I think this is something that really can set Rococo apart as like a developer workflow from other ecosystems, right? There's very few test networks that are really focusing on, well, how do you create a test bed that's going to be the exact same experience as working with the multi-chain in reality, right? You might get small slices of it, but it's going to be missing a lot of the depth and the color that shows, what is actually going to work and how things are going to function. So yeah, I'll leave it off there, and yeah, thank you very much for joining.